Hello and welcome back to Multifamily Elevated. I'm your host, Suzanne Hobson, and I am really excited to share with you this new guest today, who you may already know. She's also a podcaster on the Multifamily Media Network. Her name is Kelsi Corey. And I want to tell you just a little bit about her in case you've never heard of her, which is almost impossible. But she is the connector of people and companies. She is an executive recruiter in her history, and also is the CEO and founder of Corey Executive Recruiting. She knows everybody who knows everybody who knows everybody. And even people that are in stealth mode know to go to her if they want to get the right match. So in this episode today, we're going to dig into one of her favorite topics and her expertise in this particular area, and that is right people, right seats. You've heard me talk about this as well, and how important it is to get those right people on the bus. And so without further ado, let's welcome Kelsi Corey to the show. Hello and welcome to Multifamily Elevated. My name's Suzanne Hobson, and I am super excited to talk to you about vision, people, and execution, and how you can utilize this information to elevate you and your team and your experience in multifamily. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network, giving you the latest and greatest news and content across our multifamily sector. So let's jump in, enjoy this episode of Multifamily Elevated, and enjoy the climb. Welcome, Kelsi. I know we're going to jump right in. I'm just so excited that we could find some time on your busy calendar and mine to chit chat about right people, right seat. Shall we just jump in?
Let's do it. I can't wait to dive into this topic. You know, both of us love it, so I can't wait to share some more insights.
Yeah, me too. So, burning question for me, and I know you and I have talked offline over the last couple of years about the concept of right people, right seat, and how that's really critical for organizations, especially as they are, putting the right people on their bus, the importance of that and the methodology behind that. Not just to just dive right in, but I'm going to, because I think this is really pertinent and important right now. How do you do it? I know it's a broad question, but as an employer, when you are, trying to build the right team, right, a really effective team, there's been a lot of missteps, that I hear about offline, online, about that process. And, can you give us some really good tangibles to filtering through all of what's coming through to really make sure we're doing justice to people that are coming to us for employment, and then also as organizations we're making the right moves?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is a really and critical topic that, I'm so glad you have me on your show. Two, it's so important, especially in the real estate industry and multifamily in general. It's oftentimes, I will always admit at first, you're going to fail, and that's okay. You're not going to always get the right hire, the right first time, and then you're like, oh, things are perfect. It doesn't happen that way. I wish it did. But I think what happens though is oftentimes when the right hire doesn't, end up working out long term, we can almost not really take a look at, okay, what happened in the process? What did we learn? What did we grow through? What have we gotten more hyper focused on now of who would be the right person in this seat? Because the reality is, as you continue to scale, as you continue to evolve, as the business changes, leadership is always shifting in different capacities. That means your team dynamics are naturally going to evolve and change with that. And oftentimes we don't grow through that. We stay kind of, this is how we've done it. This seemed to work at this point in time. And we're going to just continue on this process. And we're going to pass blame onto the other side of the table. And I like to lead with transparency of, we as employers also have a really critical component in this. And, the best thing to do is take responsibility to look at your teams and say, hey, we may have not made the best hires over time, or, we ended up hitting somebody in the seat that just didn't work out long term for whichever reason that was. But it is our responsibility as not just HR and not just in the talent acquisition space, but as the executive leadership team, as your on-site teams, as everybody can come together collectively and say, what's critical? What do we really need for this region or this portfolio? Because that's another thing people don't really talk about. And we dive into this when we onboard a new client is there's going to be different challenges at different properties, at different portfolios, different ownership groups. And you have to kind of look at what personality trait out of a leader that you're looking for to guide and to help build these teams. Because what you might have on the East Coast and the West Coast and those different markets of where your properties are located are going to probably demonstrate a different type of person that has different structure, different skill set, different leadership approach. And so you have to keep that in mind as, oftentimes it's not going to be very black and white. Although you have your core values, you have your culture, you also have to take into consideration what's the challenges and who's going to really come into this spot and help us advance, grow, develop our teams, come alongside them, because I guarantee you it is not going to be the same story as the properties down the street. And that's where I think most people are not thinking about that critically. And they just say, we're looking for a regional director. Okay, let's dive in. Let's really build that out. Okay, we oftentimes will say we're looking for somebody who's a go-getter, who has this type of experience in this background, and they go to market, they interview all these people, and one or two things happen. They finally make an offer, they bring on board that person, they hope it all works out. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Or they continuously interview and interview and interview and interview, and then they're like, the search has been open for 4+ months. We're just not finding the right people. It's like, okay, I always say after 2 weeks of you starting a search, whatever opportunity that might look on your team, it's really critical that you look at how many people are in the pipeline, who do you have in the pipeline, have you spoke to those candidates, what did you learn from those folks going through that process? And then at that point, if you're still not sure if people are in alignment, that's the time when you regroup with your team and your partners that you're working alongside and saying, okay, this is what we're kind of seeing inside the marketplace. This is where I think we need to pivot and start saying, okay, now that we've got our feet wet and we're seeing what's happening in the Midwest, or, different industries are going to call for different types of folks. Then at that point, it's really critical that you regroup and then you go back to the market and then you start that process again. Oftentimes people do not do that at all. And that's why opportunities are open for 6 months later. And that's because we didn't roll up our sleeves. We didn't put the time and the commitment in, and we were not on the same page when it comes to identifying the right leaders. And so I know we spoke about this prior, but I really do believe it starts from the very beginning of the process. And what I mean by that is when you go to market, how you are outreaching to people to get excited about your opportunity versus your competitors is everything. And oftentimes people do not realize when they give the opportunity to their internal teams or their external partners, how are they showing up and communicating on your brand's behalf? Because if they're not having a great experience through that process in the beginning stage, or there's ghosting that's happening, or there's just a lack of clarity or even decision making of timeline, I promise you that your competitor who does have more of their stuff in alignment and they have that time commitment, they're going to have a much different already perspective of what is it like working with your organization? And it starts when you first go to market and you truly are hunting for the right leader. And that is where people start developing chatter. They start developing, right? What's the PR of your brand? How are you guys showing up in the very forefront of that stage? Because, right, people want to probably be a champion of your organization, but if they're not having a great experience, and then most of them will say, yes, I want to go through the interview process. I just want to hear what the opportunity is like. And then there's a misalignment in terms of not being on the same page, meaning half the team is prioritizing that search. And then the other half's like, I'll talk to that person in 2 weeks. I don't have time on my calendar. We'll keep that person warm and let's just see what happens in the interim. We've got other fires happening. And that is like I would say that is probably an obstacle. Let's face it, all of us have fires. All of us have a sense of urgency. All of us have different initiatives we have to execute. But if you go to market, you start tainting your market out there. You're not prioritizing the search with your decision makers, and you're not coming with an effective interview process. That will you are already automatically setting yourself and your team up to fail, because timing is everything. Finding the right leader for the right seat is critical, because I guarantee you by the time you're like, we love this candidate, we want that one, and then you bombed it and you don't know why they didn't decide to accept your offer, or they accepted your competitor's offer down the street. It's because you were not putting that intentionality and prioritizing that search to begin with. And so I think that's like, it sounds really simple, but I bring that up because it happens across the board all the time. And I think that people actually, there's tons of talent out there. We see it all the time, right? There's lots of different high level leaders looking for their next best venture. But what we continuously hear across all industries is that the interview process is broken. The leaders are not taking this seriously. They tell one team, right, we need this job filled like yesterday, but then half the team's not showing up on their calendar and saying, but I'm going to prioritize going through this and whatever that's going to take. So kind of leading into the next stage is my best recommendation, depending on the role and the scope, and I would say like the criticalness of the role itself. 3 interviews is really kind of your sweet spot in breaking that down. Okay, we're going to be intentional. We always want to give the candidates, right, kind of a perspective of what this process is going to look like. So they kind of have that agreement, instead of saying, this is step one, and they have no idea what your process is, because most of the time you don't know what your process is. You're just winging it. And then 9 interviews in, and you wonder why they've elected to not move forward with your organization, because there's no clarity in the beginning. There's no buy-in in the beginning process. So what I mean is, with the 3 interviews, the first one could be a phone screen, it could be a video, it could be in person with whoever needs to go through that beginning process. The second interview is really critical. That's where I think culture alignment is really important to talk about. Is this person in alignment with, hey, are they going to be a value add to the team? Are they going to help understand, this is where we are today, this is where we want to take this portfolio and the team dynamics to this level? Does this person have it? Do they got it? Do they have the capacity? All the things that we talk about, right? And then the third one, I would say the third interview, if they make it to that phase, should be either a panel or flying them out or bringing them on site to experience the culture, to experience, what is their demeanor like in person? How are they showing up, and how are you showing up? I promise you, some of the best organizations out there who've really mastered bringing on I would say the top industry leaders, they've narrowed it down to 3 interviews, and they're decisive. They're all in. They communicate to us, hey, we're prioritizing this opportunity. These are the decision makers that are engaged in this search and going to be a part of this process. And guess what? They land their next best hire, because they're all on the same page. They have a clear vision of where they're going. And if somebody's not a fit after the first interview or the second, that's okay. But they're all in the same, they're guiding in the same way. So I really emphasize on that, because you can't really get the right person in the right seat if all of this is not organized. And if your team is not on the same page and the buy-in's not there, you are making your chance so slim that at that point it would be a miracle to get the right person in there. And not only that, timeline, because we typically need to hire pretty immediately for some of these roles. And your sense of urgency can be fine. Actually, I think I encourage that. Having effective decision making in that process is going to show up to that person, whoever decided, hey, I'm going to join this brand, this organization, lead into such a better onboarding experience. Then when they're in training, they're acclimated, and then they're heavily integrated into the business and the organization, the team dynamics. But I will tell you, most people get it wrong. And the people who get it right, I can't applaud you enough, because I'm like, it's awesome to see it. And I just want more people to take that, have more weight into that.
That really speaks to your purpose, which I definitely want to get into. I can see the passion, and I know everybody else can too, and especially the people that know you. Yeah, you hit on several key things that I would love to point out. and ask some questions on. So one of the first ones is just a statement you made a few times, and I love it. And it's grow through. I'm sure people tell you that all the time. I love that so much. It puts a really great, I guess, perspective or filter on that, that
Yeah,
process.
right.
Um, and the second thing that I'm hearing you talk about a lot, which sounds a lot like sales and marketing, is really presenting this whole thing to market when you go to market with your job acquisition or your description or your job opening to really make sure that that's a thoughtful process and in alignment with your hiring team, that it's matching correctly with the objectives of that role in that region or area, or what the needs are of that particular team. It's brilliant. And you're right. Now I'm thinking about some things that I've done in my past hiring experience. We could have been a little more detailed with that. I totally see that. My favorite thing, and maybe it's just because I love process, but my favorite thing that you're talking about is the process itself. And that's where a lot of my work comes from, which is, and I'm sure you too, which is just, really being able to help teams figure out what the right process is for their organization. And that takes a whole mindset shift, I think, from the industry or from the company itself within our industry. We have some that do it really well, to your point. And then we have others that are, just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, to be honest. And it is like throwing a dart at a dartboard with a blindfold on when you aren't specific and targeted in what you're doing. And in that process that you were talking about, you've simplified it. Sometimes we get really complicated or not complicated enough. And you really simplified it by really looking at that interviewing process 1, 2, 3, right? Why we're doing 9 interviews still, I don't know. I agree with you. I don't know. I've been interviewed like several times and when I've been looking for positions, and it's exhausting. It's not only exhausting, you begin to really become unclear about what the culture is about or whether you yourself are aligned with it, because it's convoluted. It's not intentional. I think that was another word that you said. So totally agree with you. I think, people need to examine their process and see what's off. I also heard some KPIs in there. You didn't specifically say KPIs, but I did hear that connotation. So can you get into that a little bit? Because I think that, what measured gets, done, right? So how do you measure this process of acquiring talent, making sure you have the right people, right seat?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a great question to kind of dive into. And back to your perspective is, you can't really measure something if one, you don't know where you're going. Two, you don't have your team on the same page. The buy in is not there in that process. And three, you're just like, well, somebody will come along the way, right? And we're just going to get this job filled. It's like when you lead with that type of intentionality or lack of intentionality, you can't really measure anything because there's no process even implemented to begin with. So when you look at, okay, kind of back to what we were saying, when you decide, okay, we're going to go to market, we're going to launch this search. This is a critical role that we're bringing onto the team. We have over 100 applications that came in, right? And then you kind of look at, okay, who's reaching out? Who did you reach out to? That's the biggest thing is you get a lot of people that will apply to these jobs. And I know we all probably would agree. Majority of them are not in alignment, right? They don't have the skill set, the experience, the background that they bring to the table. And then you even have a fraction of that are even going to be the right culture fit. That's why we exist, right? Because really at that end of the day, when you're looking for that culture fit, you can get lucky and somebody can apply to that opportunity. But oftentimes you do have to be very intentional and go and approach those folks. And so I would say the way that we measure it here is we might talk to hundreds of people right behind the scenes of what that looks like. We prioritize our calendar, we put those people on that time frame, but by the time they get into any decision makers hands, right, we should hopefully have done our job. The talent acquisition, the HR team, if they're empowered, they have clarity, they understand what's going on out there inside the market, and they also have a sense of trust and actually have a sense of collaboration. This is the part that a lot of people don't even take into consideration is that oftentimes HR teams and TA teams, right, they're in those seats for a reason. They understand like the culture, who they're embedding, right? And they want to be looked at as almost thought partners with their hiring managers. And oftentimes hiring managers and whoever's running your recruiting department or whatever that might look like, there's a sense of lack of trust, maybe even respect. I will even say that because the hiring manager will say, "Here's my check and here's my checklist, my wish list." And even though you're seeing something different happening in the market, because the markets are always evolving, they're always shifting. There's always different, and especially different locations, right? Different markets are going to have more challenges than not. And so when you look at that, there's no communication happening. There's no trust being built. So you can't even measure KPIs at that point because it's like, well, the hiring manager said they want X, even though that doesn't exist. Or they're looking at a wish list and they're not narrowing it down to, and I always say we have to compromise. At the end of the day, you always have to find something that you're willing to compromise on. It's like, I always bring it back to like the buying and selling houses, right? You have this idea, I have this idea. I want to go and have this, and this. I want this location. I want 5 bedrooms. I want it in this area with this school district, and my budget is X. and, and if you know anything about it, usually there's a misalignment. But what happens, you cannot measure any of the KPIs, is if you just keep going on the wish list, but the budget or the parameters are not in alignment. You will never make your best hire that way. You will be frustrated. Then you will probably lose some of your best team members over time, depending on how critical it is, because you are not willing to dig in and say, okay, hey, your HR team or whoever is running that search is coming alongside the hiring managers and the leadership team and saying, this is what we're seeing inside the market. This is where I think we could be very strategic. And maybe we are willing to compromise on this, and this, but these are the non-negotiables. I promise you, if you can get really focused on that, then the folks that you have in that process can be a lot more accurate, a lot more pinpoint. And I've almost seen it happen many times where you will find your next best hire that way. But a lot of people are not comfortable, or they do not feel empowered. They do not have the autonomy to be transparent of like what's going on. And there's a mismatch in communication. And I see that happen across the board, and almost a sense of intimidation. Like they say their culture is right. We have an open door policy, but when you get to the nitty gritty and you have to have that intentionality. And I will preface, not every TA team, right, and recruiting department or HR necessarily may even have the experience to do that. And that does happen depending on how small the organization is or just the way that they're structured. And that's okay. Going into that is fine. But then somebody on the other side of the table, right, the hiring managers or the executive leadership, then knows that they need to be more involved in that process. Because at the end of the day, right, it's like you're going to have a lot of great talent out there, but usually you're looking for the one. You're looking for that one person where you're like, yes, that's our next best hire. That's who we've been looking for. And that typically has to be very thoughtful and really carried through and extremely collaborative, because if both parties are not on the same team, that's why you're going to find a mismatch. And that's why when you look at all the numbers, okay, we have 1,000 applications. How come we can't find the one, or we don't want to settle for somebody that may not really take us to that next phase of where we want to go? That's what happens so often. And I promise you, if you can work on what we just talked about and you work on this component, you will save a lot of time. You will save a lot of headache and frustration. And overall, the teams and the dynamics will feel more empowered, and they have more autonomy to go out and execute and bring on the right leaders at the right time.
Gosh, wow. That was awesome.
I was like, I hope I answered it, but
No,
it's
you
difficult.
did. No, I get you. And to your point, you can't just slap KPIs on something like this if you've got all of the process isn't correctly in place. And one of the things that you said that I think is, gold, another nugget, how there have been several, is really about being on the same page. And I found this too, where, you know, people don't even agree on the accountabilities of the role. And that right there is a setup for disaster. And I do notice this too when people come together, a team of hiring people, and they can't make up their minds. Like that is a signal or an indicator that the process is broken. And so, to your point, you've given people a lot to be looking for, these time wasters that you pointed out, and that same page conversation or alignment or collaboration. That's just healthy, right? I also think you said something else about the HR department or the hiring, team, not necessarily always being respected. And I've seen that too. They really are the experts. Hopefully, let's give the ideal, and then we can talk about the reality of it. But I do think that they have a knowledge and a global perspective because they're looking at all positions in all markets that a hiring manager may not have. So I've seen that too. And I do think that through that collaboration, understanding that these are going to be the expectations of that role, the accountabilities, and this is the right person that we're looking for, building that out prior, that becomes the filter is what you're saying.
Yes, yes, exactly. And we were just working on a search where this happens a lot too, and this probably resonates. I'm sure you've seen this on when you've been heavily involved inside the industry as well. But the ownership group and the operators, when they're in partnership, will have very different visions. And they believe they have an idea as to what they're looking for, right? So typically the ownership group will say, really looking for more of a strategic visionary to come in and help build out this platform. But then the operators are like, yeah, but we have boots on the ground. And I'm telling you, we need somebody who can roll up their sleeves and be more of a doer and be more entrenched and help still lead the way. And that happens so often. So it doesn't matter who's the smartest person in the room, all these things. We only work together our best when we all put our brains together and really I always say you want to level up. You don't want to keep playing checkers. You want to play chess. You got to look at all the pieces on the board. Everybody has a little different perspective. And then you'll find your happy medium. You'll find your balance through that process. But when somebody's really gung ho and saying, this is what we want, and this is what we want, and then somehow you're supposed to make it happen, that's where a lot of people, even if you get the right leader who finally said, yes, I want to join the team, if there's a lack of clarity in that process, and once they get involved in it 3 months in, that's why there's a lack of retention, or that's why there is a drop off, right? Because you were not, again, there's not alignment happening. And I stress about that because it is literally probably the number one issue that happens across the entire industry as a whole. Multifamily is not alone in that sector, of course, but my advice is applicable to any industry, but multifamily, that tends to be a real pattern. It doesn't matter. I always say it doesn't matter how good I am at my job. If the internal process is not there, or how the communication is, you could get the right people at the right time and you can still have that mismatch happen. And that's why I stress on this.
Totally. Totally. And, it brings another question. I don't want to get sidetracked because it's a whole nother episode that I could have you on and talk to you about. But it's the filtration systems that we have out there. There's a million assessments. And I would love to talk to you about that because there's just I feel like we're swimming in them. I myself have taken probably 7 to 10 different assessments, personality tests, all that stuff as an effort to try to, put me as, whatever it is, and used that also on the other end to filter people. And everybody's got their opinion about what assessment is the best assessment. But I know it's a whole nother
That
show.
is such a big topic. Right, right.
Promise me you will come back and talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that
yeah. That would
because
be great. That'd be
I
great.
think it's pressing for people. But the one thing I'd love to talk about is really your passion for what you do and also how you came up with Leaders on Deck. I'd love to hear that story. I just think I've already heard it, but I know some people in our audience have not. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like your passion, where that came from, and then this new thing that you're doing?
Yes, no, thank you for allowing me to share. I would say when I first started in the industry at 18, it was funny. I never thought I loved real estate. I knew that as a young child. I loved real estate. I didn't know there was so much diversity and different verticals in real estate during that time. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise that I fell into the space, which resonates with so many of leaders like yourself, right? It's not like we go to college and then we're told property management is right on the table for us, right? Most of us had no idea, and somehow we fell into it or got recruited, and then we decided to stick with it. I mean, that's why it's so fascinating kind of looking back this past decade of where did it all start. But essentially, I started at a local staffing firm that specialized all in multifamily, all property management, in Denver, Colorado. And I really grew up, I would say, during that time. And it was more of the temp to hire world. What I learned and what I've loved about it was I enjoyed people. I really took it seriously that these are people's livelihoods at the end of the day. And we're building something really incredible, teams that can go out and make those initiatives happen and really be a part of people's, everyday lives that they are bringing back home for their own families, right? Tying it into real estate and all the things that we love. But there was a moment in time where, one, I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I wrestled with the idea that I thought there had to be something sexier out there than recruiting. And I was like, there's got to be something different. And then I finally came to terms like, okay, this is it. I think this is what I'm good at. I'm going to lean into this. And this is the path that's already been created. So once I finally bought in and said, yes, I'm going to stick with this, then I really said, if I am going to go out on my own, and then I did, it's 7 years later now. It's crazy to think I really looked at it and it was very transactional that was happening. It's very much, you have 40 different openings. You have to fill those openings as quickly and as effectively as possible. And then you're moving on, you're moving on, you're moving on, right? So there's not enough relationship building. There's not enough support along the way. There wasn't enough actually caring about the people that we were engaged with, because it was always, we have a fire, we have to immediately help our partners and get this fire put out, and then we have to move on. And so when I decided to leave the staffing world and really enter into the executive search world and really focus on what I'm very passionate about is high level leaders who are mature in their careers. They understand people, they understand relationships are everything, and they have a sense of, this is my craft and this is what I love and this is where I know I thrive in. And I get the opportunity to have these conversations with leaders and to say, where can I come in alongside you in this process on both sides of the table, on both sides of the market? And how can I forge a community where it's like you're not just another number. I don't see dollar signs on your forehead. And then that honestly is how a lot of recruiting is they will not take the time to get to know you. They will not establish true relationships. And then they will not take your call unless they say, hey, you're great for my opportunity and I'm going to place you. They kind of look at it still in this very much so in a lot of lenses of, we want to just make profit, want to make money. And then they lose sight of, but people are everything. People are the asset. If you don't have the right people in the right seats, you're not going to go very far. I don't care who you are. You will not make it very far, because the people are what make the businesses thrive and make the organization, and we feed on to that. We feed off of each other if we're in a healthy environment or unhealthy environment in these company cultures. And so core executive recruiting, it's almost 7 years later, we're here and we absolutely love this space. I'm not going to lie, we're not perfect. We fail every day. There's always room for us to continue to grow and evolve. Just like there's no perfect company, there's no perfect candidate. We all just live in this idealistic world and we're just trying to create our own sense of space and belonging through this process and find our tribe, find our people along the way. So I'm really honored that we are here today, and it's because of amazing leaders like you that we get to actually learn your stories. And then Leaders on Deck, this is our newest venture, and I'm super excited about this one because it's so cool. I mean, I love it. I love it. I love it. The reason why is because in the executive search world, you naturally, right, you are looking at both sides of the marketplace. the companies that we partner with that say, hey, Kelsi, we're looking for our next VP of operations on the East Coast, right? But then when we are in the market having all these conversations, there's so many people who are confidentially looking, who are openly looking, that will come to us naturally and say, hey, I haven't been on the other side of the table in over a decade. I don't know what this is like. And I feel almost like a fish out of water, right? Like, I don't know what this next step looks like. And it's very vulnerable, right? Because it's not like you want to call your friends and go through this process or the challenges that you're experiencing at your current group. And so I almost have found ourselves as like this trusted advisor and this ally coming alongside these people inside of it and saying, we've got to create something. I mean, there wasn't a day that went by. I mean, 5 years straight, I would say every day I thought about, I have all of these amazing leaders who are looking to land their next best opportunity. What can we be doing to actually help serve these people? And that's where Leaders on Deck, it's heading into our third month. We've been doing this incognito for a long time, and it just finally I was like, we gotta branch it out and create our sister brand. And essentially it is a space to exclusively feature high level leaders inside all verticals of real estate, whether it's multifamily, SFR, BTR, commercial, student housing, you name it. This is a place where people can feel really supported along the way, and that they can actually have one centralization of a location of how do you go to market? How do you get prepared? How do you have opportunities coming to you so you're not doing all that heavy lifting, and you can be selective and be intentional and be empowered through this process? And then we support each other along the way, and celebrate wherever it is that you land in your next work home. And so it's really cool to see it growing right in front of our eyes. And it's just a nice place for it to be like, if you find out the news you just got laid off, or that you are in a toxic work environment and you're like, I need to have my exit plan. What is this going to look like for me? You no longer have to go find 10 different resources and then try to pull that all together. Because at the end of the day, back to what I was saying, these are people's livelihoods. Everybody has a different timeline of when they need to get back and provide for their families. Everybody has, sometimes people have a longer buffer of time, and some people have a shorter buffer of time. And when you have that stress and that pressure with just where the landscape is in the market, it can be very isolating, very frustrating. It can be nerve wracking, right? Because at the end of the day, we still have to provide for our families. And that's why I'm like, I do take that seriously, and we don't, hopefully we'll ever lose sight of that. And so it's really cool to build this space and just celebrate everybody along the way in this process.
What a community that
Yes.
you are building and have built really over your very powerful 7 years. I'm just in awe of you, Kelsi. I really am. I have been watching you from the get-go, and you are a star for a lot of people, a guiding star. And so I just want to personally, thank you for being in my universe, because it's
Me
just been
too.
fun, but really fun to watch. I know we've got to wrap it up. We got to get going. And I'm just remiss that I can't talk to you for another 4 hours, because I would love to.
Yeah, we would have
But
so
if
much fun.
Oh my gosh, we so would. And I see a lot of overlap in what we're doing, because I talk to a lot of people all the time who are just
Yes.
in between and they're not sure what they want to do. So more to come on all of that. But if people want to just talk to you and have a
Yeah,
conversation and pick your brain, what's the best way for them to do that, and to
sure.
get a hold of you? Yeah.
One, LinkedIn is great. I will say my LinkedIn messages, please bear with me. I do my very best, but I always do my very best to get back to people. But send me a LinkedIn message, send me a connection request. Also, go to our site, Corey Executive, CORY executive.com. There's also like a way, that's actually a great way, because then it goes directly to our team, and we see that you sent us an invite to connect as well. But I just appreciate that you taking the time and allowing me to be on your show. I think what you're doing is incredible. And it's so cool that we've built a relationship for years now. And just to see where you are today, it's like, this is what it's all about. It's literally coming alongside each other, supporting each other in these different capacities. And I cannot wait to see where you're going to be in the next 5 years.
All right. Well, until the next time, which I hope is right around
Yes.
the corner, we'll
Yes.
talk soon.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Multifamily Elevated, where we hope that you are inspired and ready to go, elevated to take on your next challenge in multifamily. So if you liked this episode, please subscribe, like, comment, and of course, share with your network. And don't forget that this was brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network that is also sharing the latest and greatest in trends, ideas, and content across our multifamily space. Until next time, keep elevating, and we'll talk soon.